my last role at Bayer, I led transformation for manufacturing. So that included both creating a sustainability organization and recruiting. And so I actually got to
Mm.
go out to college campuses, meet with graduate students, meet with fresh new engineers, right out of college or about to be out of college and looking to start their career. And that was one of the top questions that was asked is what sort of sustainability jobs are there? Oh, you lead sustainability. What kind of roles are you hiring for?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Jenna. Jenna, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me, Tom. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Jenna Fink. I am a director of research at 100, which is a small but growing supply chain digitalization company based out of the UK. Really, though, my passion about this space came from my first job out of college. I was an environmental engineer. I worked for an oil and gas company in Philadelphia and have spent the better part of my career from there going back to school to learn all about supply chain and really how to navigate solving some of these sustainability challenges that we have directly through operating in the supply chain space. So gotten to work for Amazon, Bayer, went back to school for my MBA, and really glad to be here and kind of take that wealth of experiences and try and figure out how we can move the needle on sustainability.
Okay. Amazon and Bayer, two very different companies. I want to think Amazon kind of high tech, at least tech focused, and Bayer agri, less tech. What was there must have been massive cultural differences between the two, no?
Very much so. I started with Amazon at their facility out in California, Oak Fort, which is a very large, one of the largest distribution centers in the country and fulfillment centers. And it was go, go, go. It was top speed, high volume, and an expectation that we're constantly kind of innovating, challenging perceptions, trying new things. But the flip side is they were still coming out of really, a young tech company mindset, and there weren't a lot of processes in place, not a ton of organizational structure to help
Oh.
manage sustainability top to bottom. And I actually had a really interesting experience there because my first project was to help create a waste management program at the largest facility in the country. And at the time, I was an intern. And
Oh.
so if you look at kind of like the scale and scope of who they're asking to help solve challenges, it's company wide, but they don't necessarily have the same structures and expectations and programs that you would see at a legacy company like a Bayer. And so I think Bayer was the opposite. You have 175 plus years of experience in various industries and all of the regulatory and compliance structures that comes with that. And so there were
Mm.
plenty of structures in place to support the compliance challenges that we ran into, but then you deal with the flip side of that, which is the bureaucracy and the hierarchy and having the ability to make changes within the company because it is so old and structured. And they're really going through kind of an organizational change now to address some of those things. But it was very interesting kind of conflicts in getting programs stood up and executed in two very different types of companies.
Sure. And what would you say surprised you most in your journey from there to where you are today?
The thing that I've been the most surprised by going from both Bayer and Amazon into a role where I'm supporting clients across the range of industries is how similar our challenges are, especially in the sustainability and scope three tracking space, even though the product, the company, the people are all different. And so at the end of the day, we're all having kind of these same fundamental issues with data management and getting the data right and connecting it end to end and figuring out where to report, and that's going to be whether you work in regenerative agriculture or food and beverage or CPG or apparel and automotive and industries. The way that you approach them can sometimes look different. And obviously, the regulatory world is going to look different. But the core fundamental challenges of standing up these programs, it's everyone's facing it. And it's pretty consistent. And I was really surprised by that. When you work within a company, and especially a company like Bayer that's just got such a big footprint physically in the US from an agriculture standpoint, you think
Mm.
that your challenges are maybe unique. You're the first to ever do it. You're the first to ever kind of like enter the space and figure out how to make it happen. And that's not the case. And so I've been really happy to see that there are these really cool opportunities to share information and like share best practices across companies that I didn't necessarily have access to or even think about going for, especially within Bayer.
Nice, nice. And can you tell us a little bit about, what's making people go for sustainability in their supply chains? Is it the employees that are pushing from within? Is it customers that are pushing from without? Is it the investors? Is it the boards? Is it the banks? Is it the insurance companies? Is it all of the above? Or, where is that pressure coming from?
I'll answer it as some of the above. I think everyone's got a voice in there, but the voices that move the needle from my perspective are going to be one, your internal employees that have a personal passion in the space. Those are like boots on the ground, working in our facilities that see these opportunities and want to find a way to make a difference. And they care about sustainability in their environment in their personal lives. Like these are just
Mm,
people that care deeply about doing the right thing. I'd say the second big factor that I'm seeing is more of an external factor, and that's in the regulatory world. You're seeing, especially in Europe, with the EU CSRD changes that are coming down the line that are going to create some more stringent expectations on sustainable reporting and that are going to be more broadly applicable. So you're going to see companies that aren't European based or Europe based
mm.
still have to move to these requirements because they want to be able to do business in Europe. And similarly, California is looking at measures that, again, if you do X amount of business in California, you're going to have to report out. And so the external pressure, I think, is forcing boards and executives to start to take a more proactive approach and think a little bit more about how to do better in the space. And do better isn't necessarily creating all of these, maximum efficiency gains and reducing the carbon footprint. Doing better is just figuring out like what is our baseline? What data do we have today? How are we reporting this out? How can we make the process to capture this data and report this data easier and better and less cumbersome and time consuming so that we can focus on implementing those improvements? So I think those are to me the two big ones that I see. There are obviously a lot of different spaces where you're going to feel that pressure coming. One of the interesting kind of insights that I've pulled out through a lot of my conversations with clients is on the publicly traded entity standpoint, the board tends to look at these things from a risk and resiliency standpoint. What is the risk play? How do we make a more resilient environment and create more resilience from a sourcing standpoint? And use that as kind of the so what or the why we're doing this. From a private company standpoint, though, a lot
Mhm.
of times you're seeing chairman of the board or ownership groups take a more personal stand and say, we're going to do this because this is the right thing to do. This is what I'm going to stake my claim as a leader in the space is we need to do this because we want to and because we feel strongly and because maybe we're a privately held corporation, we don't need to have that very visible ROI to our stakeholder group. And it allows for a little bit more experimentation kind of within the company because you're not constantly driven to share a financial ROI with a lot of these different things that you're implementing across the business.
Okay. And if I am a company seeing these regulations coming down the line towards me, should I be concerned that they're a flash in the pan and they'll be repealed, for want of a better word, in the coming months and years as we have changes of guard in different countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for context, I'm based out of the US. And so we just went through an election here that I think is likely going to make some changes in the regulatory environment, at least when it comes to sustainability and scope 3 reporting, specifically for the US. But as a whole, you're seeing entire communities and organizations push forward. And so, what we're seeing coming out of the EU, it's been in the works for quite a long time, and it's across multiple countries that are invested and involved in this. And similarly, in the US, while the federal regulations might continue to evolve and change and likely could be scaled back in the next 4 years or so, the state of California is moving forward with their regulatory requirements that will likely mirror quite a bit of what the EU CSRD looks like. And anybody that wants to do business in these places that do have a strong regulatory framework will have to move into reporting through these structures. And so if I'm looking at a company that's seeing growth opportunities and seeing opportunities to be, a major global player, that doesn't exist without, importing and exporting through California or having a really strong footprint in the EU. And so as you see companies come together and countries come together for things like COP20, COP24, 25, up through 29 that we see on the calendar, we're going to continue to see regulations and trying to play the game of, oh, well, maybe it won't impact me. I think will likely kind of catch these boards by surprise. And so what I would say right now is it's the time to take action, to get your data organized and to find a nice solution to at least be able to do some basic reporting. Because whether or not it's happening where you are today, we're seeing this trend globally of reporting requirements, and it's going to be really critical that we're able to address those as they come up.
Fair enough. And when it comes to starting out on sustainability, I think many organizations probably feel a bit overwhelmed. So, what advice would you have for those looking to lay a solid foundation, for example, in supply chain sustainability, especially when building connected data systems? Because you've mentioned data quite a bit now. Are there any quick wins they should prioritize?
Yeah, so when I talk about sustainability, you kind of have these three big buckets. There's scope one, two, and three. And so scope one and two are going to be the emissions that you're generating as a company. Those tend to be much easier to get a handle on and to wrangle because they're within your organization, they're within your company. And so I find that that's a really nice starting point to at least create an internal baseline. A lot of companies already have some sort of compliance driven reporting in that space today. So start with your
Mhm.
accounting teams and your legal teams. Say, what do we have already? Likely, there's an EHS team that is already submitting 90% of what you need for continued operating permits and things like that. So it's not like you're starting and creating all of this data from zero. A lot of it you already have, especially in the scope one and two space. That can help you understand where your footprint is as you start to move into what we call scope three, which are going to be our indirect emissions. And that's really that upstream and downstream, kind of that end to end, cradle to grave, if you will, emissions footprint of whatever product that you're generating or that you're selling or bringing to market. And so that tends to be where people get really overwhelmed because you're not just collecting your own data, you're collecting data from vendors, from suppliers, from logistics companies, and that gets really difficult. And so, what I would recommend there, if you're really starting to enter into that space, is look for those partners that are already doing work in the space. A lot of your largest suppliers, a lot of your large logistics networks are already capturing all of that data that you would need to report out. It might look at like a little bit different than what you're thinking it'll come back as. It might be in a different format. There might be some data transformation that has to happen, but look to those companies that have already started doing that and figure out how to partner with them. Really start to learn from those in the industry that you work with and that you partner with already on how you can take what they've developed, take whatever it be, whether it be a playbook or a dashboard or a really great tool to kind of pull this information together and see if you can utilize some of those things. So that would be where I would start from a data standpoint. More from like a cultural standpoint and how to get your organization engaged. I mentioned earlier, there are going to be people in your organization that are already evangelizing some of the opportunities in sustainability, and they might have a personal passion for it. There might even be, an employee resource group that is talking about how to implement sustainable practices in your business. Find those people that care already. Find a way to get those voices heard, to identify quick win opportunities that can help really like publicize and get people excited within the organization. And that'll help you kind of start to move the needle from a cultural standpoint.
Nice, nice. Yeah, because I had Ken Pucker, who was the head of sustainability for Timberland, on my climate podcast a year or two ago now at this point. And I remember him saying that when Timberland were starting out on their reporting, which is 20 years ago at this point, he said that for them, he was amazed to see that when they advertised roles that were available in the organization, he said the caliber of applicants they got was that much higher because they had a name for being more sustainable, for having a purpose, for being one of the few companies at the time that were actually reporting on their emissions. So he said it really brought down their cost of recruitment and retention, which, is always a big cost for any organization.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, my last role at Bayer, I led transformation for manufacturing. So that included both creating a sustainability organization and recruiting. And so I actually got to
Mm.
go out to college campuses, meet with graduate students, meet with fresh new engineers, right out of college or about to be out of college and looking to start their career. And that was one of the top questions that was asked is what sort of sustainability jobs are there? Oh, you lead sustainability. What kind of roles are you hiring for? I mean, I was floored every time I went to a campus. And these are, mind you, like rural agronomic colleges across the Midwest US. This is not, an
Wow.
NYU or a Berkeley. These are still schools that are filled with students that care deeply about agriculture, that wanted to know what Bayer's perspective was on sustainability and how they could be involved in it and what resource groups existed. And so absolutely, I second the perspective there that really strong talent wants to know that what they're doing is going to be a net positive.
And if we look at some of the technologies that are out there, obviously everyone's talking about AI these days. From 0100's research, what do you see as the most promising use cases for AI in making supply chains not just faster or cheaper, but more sustainable?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of slice and dice where AI is applicable. Interestingly enough, what we're seeing in some of our research is that the majority of the AI use cases that we've found have been in the waste reduction space. So 24% of the AI use cases that are involved in sustainability are specifically looking at waste reduction and how to either reduce the amount of product generated or to better utilize excess material or excess inventory to not create a waste. And so you've got things like plastics reduction and how do you take a look at industrial sorting and plastics reduction. And PepsiCo actually did a really interesting project called the Perfect Sorting Consortium. And it was a product that actually looked to leverage AI to better sort waste materials from a facility. And they work with a number of different partners in their industry to look at how do we better separate out materials so that we can maximize our recycling from within production and make sure that we are, instead of taking out that human judgment piece, using data as step one and then layering on the human judgment piece to best separate out materials. And so I thought that was a really fun one because it feels
Mm.
tangible, right? You throw everything in your recycling bin and you just hope it goes somewhere and something happens with it. I think those of us that have worked in the sustainability and materials space for a while know that that's not always the case. And we really struggle with, just as an industry, struggling with maximizing the reutilization of materials that go through recycling industry. So being able to layer on data and an AI tool that can help look at that is a huge step and an opportunity for advancement. So I think that's a cool one that I'm really excited about to see. They haven't reported out on the results of that yet. It's kind of an ongoing project, but really excited to see kind of what they come out with and whether that's a really viable opportunity.
One topic I'd love to dive into is because you mentioned it yourself there, the human side of these changes. When you've worked on sustainability transformations, what have been some of the unexpected human or organizational challenges you faced and how were they overcome?
I think I'm not sure unexpected or not, but I can say without fail that the biggest challenge that we had from an organizational standpoint is helping folks prioritize sustainability over other difficult priorities. If you get into kind of the nuts and bolts operations of a team, these supply chain teams are working their butts off. I mean, truly,
Yeah.
these are folks that are on the phone with the customers, on the phone with drivers, putting together demand plans, putting together, working in these S&OP meetings. They are working their butts off to make sure that the right product gets to the right customer at the right time at the highest quality. And every supply chain team I've worked on has been full of people that are passionate about that space. The challenge when we come in and ask to capture additional information with sustainability, go to new trainings, go to our customers differently with a different offering, is that people really struggle to say, why should I prioritize this over my day to day work? I've got enough work already, and I feel passionately that like the work I'm doing is providing a better experience to the customers, creating a better product. I don't see why this should override the other work I'm doing. And frankly, I'm so overburdened that I don't particularly want to add to my calendar. And so I think to help overcome that, there's two pieces of it. One, you need executive sponsorship. Absolutely critical that you are able to speak to the importance of sustainability at the highest levels in your organization. That can be a CEO scorecard, that can be tied into targets for bonuses and bonus structures and
Mm.
compensation things. But the second piece is that it's really important to tell the why of these sustainable practices and make sure that they're business friendly. A lot of the time, some of the really cool use cases I've seen for being more sustainable, especially in the logistics space, this is a really big one, logistics and inventory management. is that the more efficient you can be, the more sustainable you're going to be. We look at truckloads and we look at the ability to kind of maximize truckloads and minimize customer impact. There are a lot of win-win cases where reducing the number of shipments
Hmm.
makes for a better customer experience. We can use some predictive analytics to say this is what we think that they're going to need, that they're going to order. We can preload the truck, so we're not making 3 trips this week, we're making 1. And then if they decide not to take that inventory, that's fine. No problem, we'll bring it back. But starting to do some of those predictive things to reduce miles, to reduce inventory, really truly can help kind of make both of those things happen and make sure you're capturing the benefits of not just the ROI from a financial standpoint of reducing inventory or mileage, but give people the tools to capture the carbon reduction and celebrate that carbon reduction. It's not just a financial savings, it's a win-win for the company, for the customer, and make sure you're acknowledging that it's a true sustainable improvement as well.
It's got to be tricky because, as you rightly say, everyone's got priorities, and
Yeah.
why is your priority more important than their priorities? How easy is it, or is it possible at all to tie in sustainability wins to, let's say, reduce costs, efficiency gains, anything like that that can help you sell the story better?
I think it's a question of translation. How are you translating your kind of core operational improvements into a sustainability improvement? And that's something that if you're not talking about emissions reductions or carbon capture or your overall scope 3 targets, you're not going to take the time and energy as a leader, as a manager, or as a peer to translate some of these wins into a sustainable win or a how or a why. And so that's one where if you have clarity on data and have those dashboards set up and have that data democratized so that everybody in the company can see their impact, it should be really easy to be able to say, all right, we reduced X number of miles. That should be a quick, all right, that means you've done X tons of CO2, and that means it brings us X% closer to our targets. But if you don't have those kind of foundational data sets in place and you don't have kind of clear quality scoreboards, it's really hard to make those connections quickly. So there's some tools online, like you can absolutely just Google, how many metric tons of CO2 are reduced if you get rid of 5,000 miles of truck miles and
Mm.
guesstimate a weight. Like there's ways to kind of back into it a little bit, but the more you have a strong data platform, the easier it is to celebrate those, identify and then celebrate those wins.
Okay, nice. And obviously, given what's happening in the world these days, supply chain resilience is a really hot topic. How can a focus on sustainability contribute to resilience rather than being seen as another thing that we have to do to keep the company going?
This is where I think having the visibility end to end of your product life cycle can really help tell the story. And so for many folks in the supply chain, you're not seeing or feeling or touching the raw materials. You're getting some sort of a product that's either in the process of being manufactured or packaged and moving on down the line. How do you help create that visibility to see, oh, the raw materials for this could actually be very seriously impacted if we cannot figure out climate change? And that's going to be whether you're in food and bev and looking at like your raw material sources from an agronomic standpoint, if you're in apparel and looking at your ability to source organic cotton
Mm.
and the ability to have that kind of resilient ability to grow cotton. One of the things that I thought was really interesting in my time at Bayer is that the company was looking at where to focus its cotton growth strategy based off of expected climate risks. And that was going to be a greater expense to move the cotton production. It was going to be a greater risk because the areas that are kind of ideal for cotton growing, at least in North America, are also tend to be at risk for hurricanes. And as we see hurricanes continue
Mm.
to grow, you have to take that step back and think. And so it all goes back into how do we give people the visibility of the impact that climate change is having on their product, on their good, on whatever's happening in their supply chain. How do you help leaders tell the story and connect the dots for their employees on the raw materials sourcing or transportation logistics and managing through typhoons in the Pacific, and what does that look like from supply chain resiliency and risk standpoint. Tell those stories, help people see the impact. And I think that also helps create clarity on the why and why it's important for not just you and not just the company, but for the business as a whole.
Right. And I mean, talking about risks in the context of sustainability, especially you also mentioned scope 3 emissions, what are the
Yep.
major risks companies might overlook, and how should they reposition their approach to tackle these hidden challenges?
So I see the greater risk in scope 3 in really working with smaller vendors. I see a concern when it comes to scope 3 with making sure that you're bringing all of your vendors and all of your suppliers along for the ride with you. Very easy for a large company, a large logistics network to hire a sustainability team to put in place the right technology. They can afford that capital to measure and report out. My concern is if we continue to move into focusing on connecting that data end to end and only working with a set of partners, that we're going to lose some of those mom and pop vendors, that it's going to be really difficult to enter the market without the right data and the right tools and the right technology. And we'll start to lose some of the companies that could have been partners with organizations for long periods of time. And so I think the risk is not bringing your entire supply chain with you, not bringing all of your vendors and partners along with you and creating the education there. Again, going back to that prioritization, if you're looking at mom and pop owned warehouse that might have 2 to 4 full-time employees, when are they going to build a sustainability
Mhm.
dashboard? They're probably not. So what can you do as a company in the space to take what you've learned and to take the technology that you have and make it easier for them to come along with you, share the why, make it as easy for them to share the data as they capture it. And then you use AI tools to transform that data into whatever kind of your standard scorecard or dashboard could look like.
If you had a crystal ball looking 5 or 10 years down the road, what do you think the supply chain landscape look like in terms of sustainability in, say, 2035, 2030, 2035? And what's the story that you'd love for us to be able to tell when we start building today?
I actually had a call with a client this morning that was discussing a little bit of their vision about what they want to be able to do with sustainable reporting and the sustainable approaches. And I loved this approach. So I'm actually going to steal it from them because I think it's an awesome vision to have. And the idea is that they'll be able to take their kind of whole suite of data, end to end, product inventory, all their different regional data sets, databases, and be able to ask a tool, a ChatGPT or whatever it may be, how much carbon does it take to produce 1x of one product? Or for if I'm selling to X grocery chain, what is
Mhm.
my footprint of a product going to X grocery chain? And being able to really dive in and organize your data in a way to identify these opportunity areas and to be able to say, this product is the greenest on the market and not just have that be a greenwashing claim, but to say it costs half a ton of CO2 to put 200 of these on the market, and to be able to say that and be able to back that up with data and use that as a marketing play, use it as a contract negotiation opportunity with your suppliers, with
Mhm.
your vendors, to say our expectation is that we're going to get down to this level and we're going to have the data to back it up, and you're going to be partners with us in that activity. And that really will help us take sustainability and scope 3 specifically from this like big overwhelming topic that feels like it's just got all these different opportunities into slice and dice it. Let's search for the highest opportunity areas. Let's make it crystal clear what we're trying to do with each of these, and then we can continue to refine and get real time feedback on if it's working or not. That to me is kind of my ideal state of where we get to from a scope 3 data and reporting standpoint.
Yeah, I remember having conversations with Ariba back in 2013, 2014. I was at their Ariba Live event. Can't remember if it was the one in Berlin or the one in Rome, but they were talking about how they had this new thing where you could look down through all your suppliers and look for forced labor in your supply chain. And I
Mm.
asked the question then, that's all very nice and very laudable, fantastic, well done. But why can't you also look down through your suppliers and see which of your suppliers, which are, I don't know, say you want 10,000 desks or pens or whatever it is, you can right now look down through all your suppliers and say, okay, this one gives me the best price or this one gives me the on time delivery or whatever it is. But there was nothing similar for carbon. So, you know, 10 years later, that's still not possible. When will we be able to get something like that in something like an Ariba or similar, where you can just look down through and go, okay, these particular suppliers are great for price, but on the carbon front, not so good. So if I want to optimize for my carbon budget for next year, I should really be looking at these suppliers over here.
Yeah, I think there's two major changes that we're seeing in the industry that's going to accelerate that. The first is really the additional teeth that the EU CSRD has. It's going to be much more applicable to a broader number of companies, and so you're going to start to see some standardization of data capture and reporting that maybe the industry's been missing up until this point. So I think that's kind of step one, is just some a little bit more aggression in the regulatory compliance space. But step two, and I think this is going to be the step change piece, is the availability of AI and AI tools. A lot of the information, a lot of the data that feeds into the question of who's going to have the lowest carbon footprint in this space, that data exists. It's out there. It's very difficult to aggregate. It's very difficult to wrangle and get organized in a way that can give you a really clear insight really quickly. That's where having tools like AI that can come in, add that layer on top of the data, and generate some insights quickly, learn from previous questions, continue to evolve. That'll give you that level of clarity because the data exists, the data's there.
Mm.
But
Mm.
my goodness, nobody wants to go down and capture it and organize it. And it is time consuming and tedious and exhausting, and most people don't have the time or the resources to make it happen. AI can start to bring about the ability to capture and organize and generate those insights much faster.
What metrics or KPIs should companies focus on to measure the success of their sustainability initiatives? And, how can they ensure continuous improvement?
We standardize our metrics reporting, our greenhouse gas reporting, back to kind of carbon emissions. And carbon emissions is a catch-all. Obviously, there's a lot
Mm.
of different gases that then you can adjust and transform, and methane's X amount, X of carbon, all that good stuff. The clearer and easier that you can make your KPI to change organizational behavior, the better. And so you can normalize everything to metric tons of carbon. That's kind of an industry standard. It's a really easy way to start to measure and report out progress in a way that you can compare apples to apples with other companies and competitors in the space. What that doesn't measure is that doesn't measure progress to understanding organizational change, your organization caring, understanding the why. It doesn't measure progress towards having an accurate baseline. And so if you're looking at measuring those things, I know there's a lot of companies that do things like pulse checks and pulse reports. And so a standard question on there of, have you done anything with a sustainable impact in the past 6 months or since the last survey? Something that helps people tie the work they're doing to a sustainable impact or carbon reduction, because people are all the time doing sustainable things. Do they know that? Are they aware of that? I think that can help
Mm.
measure just that organizational change of, I am doing it and it feels good. And that's a really nice touch point to have. The second piece is, are we transparent with our data? Are we sharing that? Do people in our organization know what our target is? Do we have a target? If I were to ask an employee on the shop floor at one of my production sites, do they know what the overall company target is for reduction? And even better, do they know what their facility's role is in that? Is there a facility level kind of drop down of what their percent of the overall target looks like? So I think asking for awareness and understanding help measure the organizational progress. And then from an actual emissions reduction, it's really nice to simplify it as much as possible. That could be
Sure.
in something like that, CO2 emissions. The other one that's kind of nice to make it more tangible can be, especially if you have a logistics heavy organization, can be miles driven or something similar that feels a little bit more real and not just kind of ethereal like CO2 emissions can.
Okay, nice, nice. Left field question.
Sure.
If if you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real
Mm-hmm.
or fictional, as a spokesperson for supply chain sustainability, who would it be and why?
Wow. That's an excellent question. And I'm going to give you an even more out of left field answer. And I'll
Yay.
qualify this with I think it is most important to have people support sustainability that you wouldn't expect. So I'm going to tell you Elon Musk. And that is not because I'm particularly supportive of his policies and of his leadership style. However, I think it's become very clear that he has the ear of an entire generation, especially in tech and business world. And I think it's most critical to excite those that aren't in the space now to see that it's critical, it's going to be important for resiliency, and that it is kind of an essential skill set too to be bringing into the workplace. So if I could have someone out of left field put their voice behind the importance of this, he's the one I would choose right now, I think.
Well, if you're going that direction, why not go the whole hog and say Donald Trump?
Well, I'm not going to get into that on this call. As I mentioned, I think we're probably going to see some scaling back in the next U.S. Presidency, and so it is more important for businesses to take the lead today. More
Mm.
important for businesses to put a stake in the ground in the why and the criticality, because likely broader U.S. federal regulations will start to be pulled back, or at least will not be
Mm.
moving forward in the way that maybe they had been on track to before.
Jenna, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
No question that you asked me, but I'd like to ask you, what is it about sustainability that gets you out of bed, that makes you want to spend your time doing a podcast like this and getting people engaged?
Good question. Yeah, it's something I've been passionate about for a very long time. So I am a graduate biologist, and even before that, my my father was a professor of agriculture in University College Cork in Ireland, and he used to take me at weekends out to the countryside, and we'd go and see nature, go and see animals, farms, whatever it was. My uncles had farms as well, so I've always had that kind of love of nature inculcated in me. And yeah, like I say, I went on to do a degree in biology, did postgrad. I did a postgrad in biological control. So and then I got distracted into tech and
Ab-
started a tech firm and went from there. But I've always had still that love of nature, and the ability then to combine the two and work at the intersection of technology and sustainability has been kind of a dream come true for me.
Very cool. Well, I'm really excited to be a part of this and to hear your story. And then from my side, I guess my kind of final pitch or plea is that, if you're someone that's interested in the space, that you've got a passion around it, it's going to be more important than ever to continue to tell the story and to tell your
Mm.
why. That's going to be the same again if from a CEO of a Fortune 500 company to an individual on the shop floor that's actually frankly executing some of these programs and changes that make a difference. And so I would just ask anybody who's listening and anybody who's got passion in the space, find your place to share your story, to share your why at work, in person, in your personal lives. It's as we see a swing in policies, it's going to be so important that we continue to kind of make progress in this space.
100%. 100%. Great. Jenna, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
I will have you direct them to either my LinkedIn page, which is just Jenna Fink, and also to 0100. So we've got a member website, has a ton of really interesting content. All of our research is posted in there. They also have a LinkedIn page that posts quite a bit of that research as well. So 0100 on LinkedIn, Jenna Fink on LinkedIn, or if you want to learn more about becoming part of the community, you can reach out to me directly.
Superb. Jenna, that's been great. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.